This is Gear in Cornwall, right by the Lizard Peninsula. And this massive field is part of one of the county's most impressive hill forts. You can see its shape from this aerial photo. It's a huge 18-acre field surrounded by a bank and ditch. In fact, it's so big that an antiquarian visiting here in the early 20th century thought that it was the remains of an Iron Age city. And look at this. We appear to have another hill fort, and this one seems to have two enclosures. And as you can see, it's right next door, over there. This is Cavallic, and when the same antiquarian, Charles Henderson, visited here, he wondered whether this fortress, as he called it, might be the place where the Iron Age people ran to when they were under attack. The problem is that even though these are two of Cornwall's best preserved prehistoric sites, no one knows anything about them. We don't even know if they're from the same period, and that's why Time Team's here. We've been given the rare opportunity to find out whether these two sites are both Iron Age, and if so, what was going on here 2,000 years ago. It's a tall order. How much can we find out about these two hill sites in just 3 days? Day one of probably the most ambitious Time Team yet. 2 scheduled ancient monuments to investigate. At the bigger site, Gear, 4 acres of the 18-acre field have been ploughed, ready for a new crop. So we're seizing the opportunity to search this area for finds by field walking. Although I'm not going to admit it to Mick, I can't help but be impressed that so much work's already underway. As usual, Geophiz are busy trying to detect what's under the ground, while Henry's doing a GPS survey, which will allow us to make a 3D model of this hill fort. Mick, it's 9:45 day one. What's going on? What's all the frenzy?
Well, we've got a great opportunity here, Tony. These are 2 scheduled ancient monuments. There's never been any work done on them. There probably won't be any done in the near future. So we've got to get as much done as we can.
Look, this one alone is 18 acres.
I know. There's only a certain amount we're going to be able to do in the time, that's for sure. But I think there's certain things we can do which will help to sort out whether they're Iron Age, whether they're contemporary. We've actually started 2 trenches already. We've got this one with Jenny in up here at Gear, and we've got this one down here that Carenza's running over at Cavallic. If we can get to the bottom of the ditches of those, we can find out if there's any dating material.
Hello, Jen, can you hear me?
Hi, Tony.
Have you started digging already?
Yeah, we definitely have. We've already got Gary and Charlie roped up on harnesses and hanging off a tree.
And what have you got so far?
Well, at the moment we've just cleaned up, we've got rid of all the vegetation and we're getting rid of the modern build-up on top of the rampart, so we can see what's there. And once we've got that underway, we really need to get into the ditch and start digging that, because if it's big, it's obviously going to be a bit of a race against time to get to the bottom of it.
And we've got another one too, Carenza's
We've got Carenza here over at Cavallic, yeah.
Carenza, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tony, hi.
Have you started digging yet?
Yeah, we've been at it for a while now.
Have we got any clues as to whether or not it could be Iron Age?
Well, looking at it, it obviously is very old. There's a clue from the place name in a way, I suppose, Cavallic. Care means fort or castle. And Valach, well, the earliest spelling of that is Mahalach in 1070, and it means important person. So the meaning seems to be fort of the important person, which sounds great, because that's 1,000 years later than the Iron Age. So at the moment, we're only on guesses and hopes, really.
Hill fort is an old term often given to prehistoric sites like these, meaning that they were built with defence in mind. The modern view, however, is that they probably had many different functions and were often more about status than defence. But so little's known about enclosures like these in Cornwall, commonly called rounds, that anything we can find out about them is going to be an important step forward. The only clues to what's been happening at Gear in the past come from the finds collected by farmer Rex Hoskin.
This is what you've picked up over the years, is it?
Yeah, well, roughly between 1980 and 1990, about 10-year period.
Yeah.
And the family used to laugh at me. I could think bringing all these bits of stone in and spend an hour washing in the sink. So after a while, I got fed up being laughed at.
There's a lot of flint here, Phil.
I mean, that is what makes it such a nice collection as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, the fact that there is so much flint here. The one piece that I can be absolutely certain about is that.
Oh, with that little spike on the end.
That is a chisel arrowhead.
Cool.
Cutting edge across the top, probably hafted like that. And that is definitely going to be late Neolithic, maybe 2,500 BC. I can say
That
like
looks as if that would give you a sort of blunt edge on the end of your...
What do you mean, Mick? I mean, if this is coming at you at a fair old lick, you've got this razor-sharp edge along there.
Right.
That ain't blunt.
I expect that to have a point on the end.
No.
No.
This will cut. I mean, what all this boils down to is it just demonstrates to me just how long people have been living on this site. Never mind the hill fort for the time being. People have been living here for thousands of years before that fort was built.
So when we get to the...
But it's this selection of Iron Age pottery, lumps of iron slag, and also items like this Grison stone bowl, a copy of a Roman ceramic bowl, that have prompted the idea that Gearfield was busiest in the Iron Age and Romano-British period, something like 2,000 to 1,800 years ago. The first geophys results are ready for Gearfield and appear to be showing the location of what might be an Iron Age roundhouse with a hearth in the middle. The results are so good that we've asked Geophys to press on and extend the survey. In the meantime, Phil and English Heritage Inspector Ian Morrison are keen to get a trench started to test the results.
Yeah. So what we're proposing to do is actually to put a trench through that so that if there is an entrance, we've got a better chance of getting it.
Yeah.
You're happy with that?
Very, yep.
Well, I've just dug this hole and we can see how deep the plough soil is now, so we could actually get on with it.
Machine that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much to move by hand, isn't it?
I'm glad you're in agreement.
The plough soil here on top of the hill is only 9 inches deep, so it doesn't take long to carefully expose the first layer of archaeology.
There, look, there it goes.
A decision's made to widen the trench, and straight away Phil's got more to shout about.
Hey, Anne! Have a look at this. Look at that. Look,
wow.
There's an enormous bit of pot broken down through there, so that's in situ. Oh, look, here it goes again. Look, there it goes.
It's burnished as well, isn't it?
Look at that. Look, we got this big piece here, look.
Oh, crikey.
Going right the way around there.
Yeah.
And in there, look, and then there's this bit here.
Is there another bit over here?
That's right, yeah.
Ah, so you got the complete pot there.
Well, I don't know. That bit we've dislodged.
Oh, wow. This is Iron Age, yes.
Going on into the Roman.
Yes, it's definitely not Bronze Age.
It's looking promising. Could we have a complete Iron Age pot sitting inside a roundhouse?
OK, Ian, you're working well.
Phil's job now is to carefully widen the trench even more.
Just that little veneer of topsoil there, we'll whip that back and we'll clean it back as we go.
With 2 sites to deal with, the Geophys team started early and did their survey at Caervallic yesterday. As you can see, it clearly shows lots going on in the outer enclosure, but initially a trench is being opened up here to investigate the strongest signals in this area.
You can see here that we don't really actually have very many structural type anomalies in this area at all. And as you say, we've got a nice group of pit type things here tucked up against the bank.
I mean, we're very tempted by all of this over here, where there's obviously a lot going on, but we did feel, having opened one trench over the rampart ditch on this enclosure, we really need to finish investigating this really before we start looking at that other enclosure.
So we're hoping for some dating evidence from here.
Well, that's what we really want from this enclosure, is some dating evidence from one or other of the trenches to give us any idea of how old it is.
These monuments are scheduled monuments, scheduled as ancient monuments. The long-term aim is preservation of these for future generations.
Fundamentally, yeah.
And yet you seem very keen to learn more about them, and to do that we've got to dig holes in them, which is destroying them, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, but it is a common misconception that scheduled monuments should be fossilised, should be preserved and not touched.
Yeah.
It's extremely important to realise that scheduling is more about protecting it from these sites from development, from erosion, from the gradual loss of archaeological information without any record. I mean, of course, we've got to preserve large amounts of these sites for future generations, because you know how archaeological science has developed over the last few years.
But you said a large proportion,
well, that's right.
rather leaving the idea that you should always sacrifice a little bit to learn something.
Well, you know, what is it for? We need to understand about, more about our past, because if you don't know what's there, how do you decide how best to keep it?
Yeah.
The ploughed area at Gear has been divided into 5-metre squares, and we're hoping that a systematic search will show up any concentration of finds.
A Bronze Age flint thumbnail scraper.
Have you got anything Iron Age so far?
Nothing really to speak of. We've had, I suspect, probably about 20-odd pieces of Iron Age pottery now.
What's this?
Just found it.
Is that Iron Age?
Is that Iron Age?
That is certainly Iron Age pottery.
There you go.
Yep. Well, now that is the best piece we've had so far. It looks like a little beaker.
Whereabouts was it?
That was in grid A12, right in the far corner.
Oh, right.
A12.
Get that down.
It looks like there might be something down there as well.
Well, that's it, see. I mean, if we can get all these spots put on the plan, and then once we've done that, we can get somebody in there to dig them. At least if we know they're there. You devil.
Sorry.
No, shouldn't be doing this. It's totally frivolous.
Quite right, Phil. No time for monkeying around. But spirits are high because even I can see we've got what looks like a complete Iron Age pot sitting in the ground next to an area of burning, probably a hearth, and the curving wall of what must be a roundhouse showing up around it. But the best news of all is that the latest instalment of GeoPhys is showing that the higher ground in this field is crammed with archaeology. It is fantastic. It's spectacular results, isn't it?
Yeah.
Are all these circular things early human habitation?
Well, I think it must be, mustn't it? With these circles and lines, it all looks,
They all look artificial, don't they?
Yeah.
Well, this is a zonkering great black thing here, isn't it?
And you've got this clear earlier boundary that it either sits on top of or is earlier than.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly one of the targets we should go for, isn't it? The relationship of that to this big thing. I think we should look at that. We'll look at this double ditch thing in case it's a barrow.
Was that like an early burial chamber?
Or burial mound, something like that, or rather than a house. And then this ditch thing here, which I think, looks as if it might be a sort of earlier ditch or inner ditch, presumably your track round there, and perhaps we'll have a look at that then.
None of the big Cornish prehistoric sites have ever had this amount of geophys done on them, so this is all new and exciting information. The challenge is where to place each of our new trenches in the hope we can identify Iron Age occupation from Bronze Age, or possibly even earlier activity in this field. We're approaching the end of day one. Are we doing as well at Caervallic?
We've been really worried all day that this site might turn out to be really late because we found nothing. But we have now got quite a lot of Iron Age pottery.
Excellent. Wow.
We've got a couple of rim sherds, and it's all quite freshly broken.
What do you mean freshly broken?
Well, you can see here these edges aren't at all worn. They're really very much just as they went into the soil. So it shows they haven't been moved around a lot.
So basically they've come from here?
Yes, so it proves that this site is Iron Age, which is fantastic. We never knew that before.
We've unearthed several different types of Iron Age pottery coming from a feature that might turn out to be a rubbish pit. Meanwhile, how's Barney getting on digging the ditch and rampart that goes around Caervallic?
I'm getting on fine. It's absolutely brilliant. We've got basically a huge rock-cut ditch.
Now, is that an Iron Age cut, that vertical section, or is that what the digger's just done?
No, this is, I don't know whether it's Iron Age, but it's certainly old. It's of antiquity. This is the original ditch cut going straight through bedrock. It's at least 4 metres wide, this ditch, and it's at least 1 metre deep. So right the way around the ringwork, that's got to be thousands of tonnes of stone that's been moved. Yeah.
It would make the most amazingly impressive monument then with that vertical face through rock. Very difficult to get into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tomorrow, Barney will hope to find some dating evidence in the bottom of the ditch. But it's been a great day one at both sites. And to cap it all, I've just been handed yet more geophys results from Gear Field. It's 5 to 7. Phil's up to his neck in archaeology. What have you got, Phil?
Well, the most important thing, Tony, is we've got our Middle Iron Age pot. Look at that. It's a beautiful rim. Middle Iron Age, probably about 300 BC, and it comes from our Iron Age roundhouse.
What part of the Iron Age house is that?
That is the foundation trench, and here is the doorway. So tomorrow we'll take out some more of the foundation trench, we'll lift the pot over there, and we'll start digging the hearth as well.
Gentlemen, before we knock off for the evening, have a look at this geophys.
Well, that's amazing.
There's going to be some real hard chatting about where we do on that, isn't there?
It is fantastic, isn't it? If you want to see it properly, join us after the break.
Look at that.
Beginning at day 2, yesterday evening, I rather unfairly failed to show you our geophys results. Look at that, isn't that pretty? Virtually all of this is human activity, and most of it appears to be prehistoric. This little thing here is what we're excavating over here, and it looks like it's an Iron Age hut. But over here, we're having a meeting, because with all this stuff going on, how the heck do we choose what to dig and what we just leave alone? After all, we've only got 2 days left. Mick, so much lovely stuff and so little time.
I know, that's what we're discussing. Well, we're digging here, of course, this is the big trench, and we've got one in there that's not producing a great deal.
Yeah, but you've not gone deep enough.
No,
yet.
okay, so we need to do more there. We'd already decided we were going to do something across this double ditch thing here. So, you know, those 3 targets are on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, isn't it, that we're not looking at one phase of occupation here, we're looking at several phases, and it's very difficult to understand exactly what we've got. And what we really need to do is to try and extend the area of geophys before we actually start to make concrete decisions on where to put the next trench.
So we're going to do even more, John, down here in this funny little bit?
Well, it sounds like it.
One reason for waiting for more geophys is that they might get even clearer results on the lower slopes of the hill, where a build-up of soil may have protected the archaeology from plough damage. But surely the rest of the field can't be as good as this, can it? Meanwhile, Jenny and her team are making great progress excavating the ditch and rampart to find out how and when it was constructed. While what seems like miles away in the ploughed area of the hill fort, the archaeology in our roundhouse is much easier to see without the full glare of the sun.
You see there's a distinct red line, which comes along there.
Right.
It's very heavily burnt there with the black. It comes along there, around there. It's like a flue, and then it comes back down this end here.
What we've got then is a tongue of enormous heat.
And we've got big lumps of charcoal there and there, actually in the flue.
Right, there's another piece there, look.
Yeah.
Is it similar to things you've seen elsewhere, Peter, or things you've done yourself?
I'll tell you what it reminds me of. This could be the tunnel to a pottery kiln.
Right.
Possibly.
Right.
But is that the sort of thing you're going to have in a building?
Not inside a building, but then we're looking at so many phases, aren't we?
Peter's suggesting that it could be the remains of a kiln, perhaps something like this, and not a straightforward hearth where the cooking would normally be done. One thing's for sure, we definitely have a complete Iron Age pot sunk into the floor of the house.
I mean, presumably this could have fallen in.
It's exactly the same fabric.
Oh yeah, like that.
Yeah.
So it's...
Carl!
That's the man.
Oh, yes, that looks like it is southwest decorated well.
Southwest decorated.
That's exactly what my response was going to be.
So we're talking about Iron Age.
We're definitely talking about Iron Age. Between sort of 200 and 100 BC, I'd say.
Wow.
What's amazing is that the archaeology is so close to the surface, something Rex is well aware of.
When we asked Rex how deep the archaeology was, he said 9 inches.
Yeah.
And how deep is it?
Well, it's about 9 inches everywhere we've looked, yeah.
That's right. And what's happened is Rex hasn't ploughed very deeply at all. And you can tell that from the finds that we're picking up in the field.
So you've done no more damage than hundreds of years of ploughing over the site.
That's what I think. In the past, we got a picture of an old steam plough here.
Oh, yes.
And I think this is the beast that did most of the damage about 100, 150 years ago, when they'd have a steam engine either side of the field and winches plough from one side to the other.
And they use that to actually bust up ground as well, didn't they?
The problem is that the modern tractors these days that they use in most of the country where they're intensive farming, they tend to go deep. They tend to break into the subsoil and pull it up and destroy all the archaeology. Whereas Rex doesn't use this, the bigger machines, and has been very careful to stay above the archaeology.
At Caervalach, we've discovered Iron Age pits in the small enclosure and an impressive rock-cut ditch surrounding the site, but so far we've found no sign of any roundhouses. Carenza's now turning her attention to the outer enclosure, where we've got lots of intriguing geophys signals.
But it seems to be within a complex of other anomalies. So
there's so much going on in this area of the site. In complete contrast to that.
Totally, absolutely. And to be honest, I really don't know what's happening here.
This is the only way we're going to find out if the outer enclosure was occupied in the Iron Age. Meanwhile, at Gear, the delicate task of lifting the 2,100-year-old sunken pot is about to begin.
The difficulty is, of course, I'll have to get in behind all the bits.
Yeah.
And then hopefully, as we lift them, we can lay them in the tray in their relative position. So instead of just having a load of pot just bundled in, it will give us some idea. But
when you're removing pot like this, if ever you break a bit, do you beat yourself up, or can you feel relatively philosophical about it?
Generally, I think I'd probably want to beat myself up. I mean, there's a certain element of that says you are philosophical, but I think if you care about what you're doing, then you certainly don't want to mess it up.
Thanks to Phil's careful work, it was possible to restore this pot, which intriguingly had its base cut off, and even our experts couldn't think of a reason why that might have been done.
You're very privileged, Rex, to do this. Normally, we don't have a helicopter big enough to carry any passengers.
All right.
So we wouldn't want everybody to give the impression they can get a helicopter ride.
Right. So, Stuart, this would be a defended hill fort, would it?
Well, the term hill fort's confusing because people tend to think of hill forts as like big defended military places, whereas in fact what we ought to think of these great big enclosures is they serve the purpose as a community centre. Places where people come to, where they trade, where they exchange things. And this site sits ahead of a big estuary on a headland. And I think that's important, its location is important from that point of view of trading and where people actually come to. And I think we've got to view it as serving this big headland community. Because although there are lots of places like Caervalach on this headland, there's only one enclosure the size and substance of Gear.
Stuart's been looking at the distribution of prehistoric sites in Cornwall, and interestingly, while there are literally hundreds of smaller rounds similar to Caervalach, Gear is one of only 20 or so large enclosures, and the only one in this area on the Lizard Peninsula. But was this huge enclosure at Gear created in the Iron Age? To find out, we've been digging across this ditch, which goes all around the 18-acre site. As luck would have it, our 2-metre-wide trench hasn't turned up any dating evidence. But Peter Reynolds reckons it's all been worthwhile to see the construction of the rampart.
You've got a big ditch here, you've got a bank, and where Jenny is, it doesn't have to be a massive palisade fence, it's just ordinary fence. Another 5 feet on top of that, that's really a statement. We are here.
You say it's a statement, so you're saying it's not primarily for defence, more to say how powerful we are?
Well, I don't think any of these enclosures could be defended. There aren't enough people living inside to take on a sustained attack from outside. They are always vulnerable.
I think the other thing that impresses me is how clever they were in using the contour of the land that was already here to build it. They've used a sort of slight natural slope that's here already to sort of ease the amount of work they've had to do.
Yeah, because the natural stuff is here, isn't it, Jen?
Yeah.
Just there.
The very orange stuff is what was there already.
Runs across to there.
Yeah.
So is that lump that sticks out then, you reckon, the old ground surface on which the rampart was built?
Yeah, everything from me to Pete is build-up, basically.
So, Pete, would they have used this little platform here to build up the higher material and then as a platform to walk around?
Well, not so much to walk round. Its initial purpose is to stop the bank eroding into the ditch.
Falling into the ditch.
And as soon as you've got grass or vegetation growing on there, it's all stabilised.
Yeah.
But that's the real purpose of a berm.
A berm?
A berm.
How do you spell that?
It doesn't explode. B-E-R-M.
You've got a really nice berm, Jenny.
Thank you very much.
Close to the rampart, Rex found a small cache of rounded stones, and these are typical of what's been found at other Iron Age sites.
Sling stones. You couldn't possibly have stones all this size just happen accidentally. These have been deliberately collected to be used as slingshots, and I'll bet you, by the look of the surface conditions, they've come off the beach.
Iron Age reenactor David Freeman's here to demonstrate how effective a weapon the slingshot was.
If you had a packed a number of armed men coming at you.
A few of you with slings.
I mean, how on earth was it for the Romans if they'd have been on the receiving end of that?
Serious problems. Get one in the face, it'll just simply take all the bones out without any bother at all. It'll kill you almost instantly.
Good God.
The gap at the top of the armour, if it hits in through there, it'll go embed itself in your chest. In the Roman medical manuals, there is actually instructions on how to get a slingstone out of a soldier's body.
Is that right?
Using a pair of tongs that are pushed in to grab the stone. They have to hold them down on the table because there's no anaesthetics.
Naturally, Phil wanted to go.
Better, yes, nice one.
Yes!
Excellent. Well.
In our little experiment, we managed a distance of about 80 metres, and in terms of speed...
71.5! I tell you what, you're nicked, mate.
Enough fun and games. Time at last to let John have a break while we look at his latest geophys.
Well, what do you think?
What have we got, John?
Well, we've managed to extend the survey. And look at these anomalies. They're really clear. And
You were right. The overburden has protected it, isn't it?
I mean, there's a really nice enclosure there. It looks as though it's got sort of pits-fired material in that area there. And then this stonking ring ditch with a sort of annex on the side.
And you've got, these are presumably still the later, the more modern field walls, like the sort of thing you see with bushes on the top and everything.
Yeah. If you see this irregularity around here, and there's another linear feature here, and if you see there's almost another one there which seems to respect both, joining up, which suggests to me a possible field pattern. But the uniformity of the circle there is almost certainly structural.
So presumably we're looking at a round house there, and this is some sort of farmyard or enclosure. It doesn't have to be regular, does it?
Yeah, no, that's right.
So I think if we're talking about a trench, we ought to be going in there and ignoring that.
If you follow my finger here, we've got some kind of internal division which comes down round the slope and almost respects that roundhouse there. And the curious thing is that all of the round features are within it. There's none yet, as yet, that come outside it.
So why might that make this one of particular interest?
Well, because we can get the relationship between the two. It's almost like killing two birds with one stone.
I could buy that if we were trying to, hit two targets there, see what happens with that in relation to that one. But I still think that's probably where we should start. And we've got a couple of hours left of today. We can get quite a lot done on that.
A couple of hours?
It's only 5 o'clock. Hell's teeth, when do we ever stop before 7?
It's light till 8:30, isn't it?
It's light to 8:30, John. That's good news, isn't it? We're going to hold off digging this until we get more geophys about this area, which might be part of a settlement that's earlier than Iron Age. This trench, in the meantime, should establish if we've got Bronze Age activity in this part of the field. And it isn't long before we've got our first clue.
What are you thinking?
I'm hardly an expert, but see the coarseness?
I know. You're
fabric,
obviously...
all the fragments in it. And the fact that it's much thicker and the way it's been fired.
That is a lot cruder than what I was finding at the top there.
Yeah.
Go on, put a date on it.
Well, yeah.
Well, that's a terrible thing you're asking me to do, but as a hunch, I'd say it's Bronze Age.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah.
That's what the geophysics said.
Oh, what do you mean? Oh, you go into dating services now, have you?
We got this sus, totally.
It's been another terrific day at Gear, and there's just time to check on how Carenza's got on at Caervallic.
Right there.
So, we're in this figure of 8?
Yeah, we're by that trench there.
And what have we got?
Well, it's very difficult to see anything in this trench in terms of what the geophysics produce, but we've got this spread of stones in the trench here, which we think might be the very top of a large pit. The really interesting stuff we have had coming out of here has been the finds. Haven't had a huge number, but almost every single one of them has told us something really interesting. But the brilliant thing, the really, really interesting thing that we found is that.
That?
I knew I'd have trouble convincing you of this. You have a look at it, see how shiny it is, touch it, feel how smooth it is.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
And there's the same surface there. And what this is, you can see the lines of those two things. It is the tip of a blade of a polished flint axe. And in the Neolithic, 4,000 years ago, these were your £150,000 sports car. These are the big status items of the time.
Neolithic. And what about those polished stones? Are they Neolithic too?
We don't know. We're thinking they're Iron Age, but that's before we found the axe. But the really important thing is there's no flint locally. This has come from a long way away. It may have come as a really important gift from somewhere as far away as Kent.
Chris, what are you doing peeping up and down our trench?
Well, I'm just trying to find out how magnetic the soil is on the surface here, Tony, to see if there's definitely a pit here. And the good news is that in amongst all these stones, I think that the readings are very high for here and there must be a big pit. Hopefully there'll be a lot more to come.
Given what we've already had out, that beautiful axe, what else might come out of here?
So we've only just skimmed the surface here, and it looks as though maybe the whole reason why this site was so important in the Iron Age was because part of it, and in particular this part, may have been high status for 2,000 years prior to that. One day left. Join us after the break to see the puzzle of the burnt wood.
Nick, really, you should come over here. This is absolutely fantastic.
To visit an Iron Age roundhouse.
Double red peg.
And to judge my performance as a geophysicist. Beginning of day 3, welcome back. Here are our 2 hill sites. There's the little one there and I'm in the big one. Most of the activity is taking place here, but I'm now at the far end here. I've been brought down here by Stuart, who's desperately excited about something, as he always is on day 3. What is it this time, Stu?
Well, I think we've got the entrance into the enclosure, Tony.
Fantastic,
but
where?
Well, just there. I mean, the reason I wanted to come here was that we've walked all around the circuit of the earthworks, and although it was originally hidden by trees, there was a definite gap through the earthworks there. Plus, we had this air photograph which shows a crop mark of a trackway coming across this field here. Now, that trackway came across this field here, but you can't see it now because this photograph's taken at a different time when the conditions aren't right for showing the crop mark. But in the wood, you can actually trace it as a physical feature, a hollow way down the slope leading to the estuary at the bottom.
So I'm an Iron Age man, and I'm just coming out of the gate. What would I see ahead of me?
Well, amazingly, you'd see the next significant enclosure, which is Castle Pencair. And that would be visible as you approach the entrance, but as you go through it, it disappears. So it does seem to be significantly placed in relation to the next big site like this.
Would there have been gates?
Oh, there have been quite large gates here, probably wooden structures. There may have been stone because there's a rock-cut ditch here, but that's what we were hoping to find that out.
What have we got in the trench?
Charlie, can you explain to Tony what we've got?
Well, at the moment it looks as though we've got a rock-cut causeway across the ditch here, which was left in where the ditch was excavated. And it looks as though it's possible here we've got the end of the ditch coming round.
Right.
With the entrance then coming through here.
Finds often turn up in the ends of the ditch where the ditch meets the causeway. So we're still hopeful that we might get some dating evidence for the construction of this huge enclosure. Our ever-expanding geophys plot continues to show signs of settlement over thousands of years. And our job of trying to find out which squiggly line belongs to which period isn't getting any easier. Yesterday, we put in a trench over this enclosure, and it's produced pottery that looks to be Bronze Age or earlier. Because this enclosure appears to be linked to another one, we're going to assume that this one's early too. Ian and Mick have decided to place our last trench here, to see if this is an even better preserved roundhouse sitting inside a big Iron Age boundary ditch. You've done a lot of geophys over the last 3 days, haven't you?
You tell me.
Are you exhausted?
Yeah.
But you've still got more to do?
We've got this triangle in here to finish off.
Do you want a hand?
What, you?
Yes. I'll do it.
OK. What you've got to do is walk in a straight line between that double peg and that double peg, 20 metres away.
Yeah.
That actually controls the speed at which you walk.
Yeah.
So at the start, it's all switched on, set up. You flick that switch, and then you hear the sound, and you have to walk at that pace. Constant pace. so that by the time you get to that other double peg, it's come to the end of the line.
Yeah.
And it stops beeping.
Why do I have to walk at a constant pace?
Because it's taking readings automatically, and it's on a timer basis. So as you walk along, it's actually measuring the magnetism in the soil.
Yeah.
And so if you went at different paces, we wouldn't know where you were.
Right.
And keep it a bit closer to the ground.
Right. Off we go?
Yep. Faster. Aim for that double red peg.
It stopped.
Oh, not bad.
It stopped. In the middle of the ploughed area, we're still investigating the Iron Age roundhouse we uncovered on day one. Here to help us make sense of it is Iron Age expert Henrietta Quinnell.
You've got, particularly the pottery.
Right, well, it's all got very interesting indeed here. We've got a very long, narrow furnace or kiln or something like this coming through here. Phil was looking at it earlier. All we found is a red patch here, but it's now turned into this very long structure. And we've been getting bits of pottery out of it like this.
Oh yes, well that's a nice rim shard, definitely later Iron Age, possibly really quite late in the Iron Age. Very good quality, you can tell from the thinness of the wear.
But you would see that as right at the end, right up against the sort of Roman conquest time, would you?
It's certainly of the quality which was occurring at that time, yes.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
But it doesn't really tell us what this is, though. That's what we're trying to find out.
Well, is this not inside this house, though, Kate?
It's inside the house, and what's interesting is that it's aligned straight towards the entranceway, so it looks as though there might have been a through draft.
So, show us where the entrance is.
The entranceway is here. This is one end of the wall, and this is the other. So it's about 3 metres wide. You come through here.
As a reminder of what Iron Age buildings looked like, Phil and Peter Reynolds have gone to visit a reconstructed roundhouse at Bodrifty, about 20 miles away.
I mean, you get something like this, and our site suddenly springs to life. You imagine dozens of these all over the hill fort.
The big difference with this house is that it's built in an area where granite's available, whereas the walls of roundhouses at Gear more likely were built of earth and faced with small stones similar to a Cornish hedge.
The Cornish hedges, you know, where you've got two sets of stones either side and an earth infill, what would that leave archaeologically if you were to plough it out to hell and back?
Oh, yeah.
It would disappear, wouldn't it? All that skillet would smash down into the tiny bits we find in the soil.
Yeah.
Right, the soil would be distributed fairly evenly through time, and all you'd have is the foundation bit,
which is what we've got. Right, shall we go in and have a look at it?
Let's have a look inside.
The size of this roundhouse is similar to the one Kate is currently excavating. As you can see, the roof doesn't have a hole in it. The smoke from the hearth would have gradually seeped out through the thatch.
Yeah.
Now, and we've got a beaten earth floor.
Good functional floor.
A really good floor. And then in the middle, the hearth.
But the thing that really saddens me on a site is that we've got this beautiful building.
Yeah.
We've got no evidence for that at all.
None.
And yet from an excavation point of view, it gets worse because we wouldn't even get the floor. It's all been ploughed away.
Yeah. And the only thing we're going to get is the magnetic anomaly from where the fire was.
The very base of the deepest features.
Yeah, that's all there is.
And at Gear, we're still thinking that the deepest feature might be the remains of a furnace or kiln.
Mick, you should come over here. This is absolutely fantastic. While we've been chatting away, Joe's just uncovered this. It looks like a whole plank going into the furnace.
There's a grain on it, can't you? So almost the last charred piece of wood.
Yeah.
But if that's continuous grain, it's a very substantial piece of wood, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't want to throw a spanner in the works, but it does make you wonder whether in fact we've been interpreting this the wrong way and whether we've actually got a timberline feature which has happened to catch fire with all that draft coming through the entrance.
There's so much happening at Gear that it's easy to forget we're actually investigating two sites. At Caervallic, Carenza's found more pottery in the outer enclosure and wants to know if it's 4,000 years old and goes with the fragment of Neolithic axe she found yesterday.
Well, I certainly think it's very nice. It's got a superb decoration of curved incised lines. I don't know if you can see it in this light, but you've got a double line there and a double line there, outlining a kind of leaf shape, a kind of curvilinear pattern. And this is entirely distinctive of southwestern decorated ware, the pottery which is common down here from about 300 BC onwards.
So it's Iron Age.
So I'm afraid it's Iron Age, but it's very nice Iron Age pottery. This southwestern decorated ware comes in a variety of forms. This is very good quality. Some of the decoration is entirely geometric.
So what on earth is a Neolithic axe doing in an Iron Age trench?
Well, the axe is definitely Neolithic. That doesn't change that. And I guess what must have happened, there's some high status activity. There's somebody important up here in the Neolithic, because that piece of axe fragment hasn't walked up here by itself. Someone's owned it. So I still think this site is 4,000 years old. We've had high status activity going on here sporadically in the Neolithic. From what Henrietta says, the Iron Age pottery is very nice. And the great thing is we've now got a definite date for the feature. We found that pit that we were looking for with the geophysics last night. It's full of this pottery. So we've now got a really accurate date for it. And that's brilliant. And just look what's coming up in the bottom here. And you see we've got masses of this pottery just lying here. Huge lumps of it. And there's much more of it back in the section as well, just lying on the bottom of this pit. And it could just be the rubbish that's been thrown down on the bottom of the pit, or who knows, maybe it's all one vessel and it's a vessel that's been sort of offered to the gods in a pit.
But rubbish or gods, it's Iron Age.
It's Iron Age.
So what we've been able to discover at Caervallic is that it appears to be dotted with Iron Age pits full of high-status pottery.
Iron Age jigsaw coming up here.
The puzzle is that we've found no trace of any roundhouses here, although who knows what a trench across some of these other geophys signals might have revealed. We've run out of time on this site, but we have achieved our main objective. We've proved that both enclosures at Caervallic date back to at least the Iron Age. And although Barney wasn't lucky enough to find any dating evidence in this trench, he did establish that it had an incredibly impressive ditch cut through sheer rock, suggesting that this must have been a place of some importance in the Iron Age. At Gear, not only are we building up an incredible map of archaeology, but we've got the field walking results, which can be cross-referenced with it.
And of course the pottery is interesting because in areas that we haven't been able to dig, we've got great concentrations where there must be other houses and other occupation, particularly down that area.
Katie, meanwhile, has forgotten all about kilns and is excavating what's clearly a plank of Iron Age wood in the centre of our original roundhouse.
There's a plank of wood going along the bottom here, which might have been pierced by holes that held up wattling. You can see the thinner sticks here and here.
Yeah.
And there's some over the other side there, which might have been used as a partition wall in the middle of the roundhouse.
Does that make sense to you?
It doesn't make nonsense, that's for sure.
The experts have to admit they've never seen anything like this before inside an Iron Age house. Normally, wood doesn't survive. It's only that it got burnt 2,000 years ago that's preserved it for us to puzzle over today.
It might be an actual physical structure of some kind which needed to be held upright.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a beam at the bottom, things stuck into it.
That sounds like something like a loom or something to me.
The only problem with that, Mick, is if it's a loom, normally you turn them side on to the doorway.
Well, yes, to get the light from over there.
That's right.
Yeah. Can I not see some rods of sort of charcoal in the end of the section there?
An analysis of these remains in the lab might provide an answer. But in the meantime, Katie's remembered some other evidence that might help to solve the mystery.
There are actually some polished stones over there behind Peter, which might be associated with a loom.
Well, with sort of cloth smoothing
cloth
or
working,
something,
yeah.
right.
But it could be, when you think about it, if those stones are used not just for cloth, but for skins. And then you would need a rigid frame, a really powerful framework to hold the skin in place while you're actually breaking down the fibres of the damn thing.
Yeah.
So those rubbing stones might be part of it too. You're right.
Well, that's certainly 1,000 times more shiny than all the stones around it. But isn't that just natural?
No way. That this kind of high gloss only comes from regular use on working something like cloth or leather.
So it could have been a plank of wood seated in the ground, holding perhaps a frame like this, in order to carry out an activity that must have been commonplace around here in 300 BC.
That's one interpretation, Victor.
Yes, well, it could have been.
But why it
else.
burned? Nobody knows.
I hear you've got some good news, chaps.
Oh, we've got some brilliant news, Mick.
Crikey,
What-
that's a big hole, isn't it?
Well, what we've got here is the end of the ditch, which defines the entrance to the enclosure here. You're standing right on the entrance to this big prehistoric enclosure.
So we now know that this is the original entrance rather than anywhere else.
That's it, absolutely. And we've got some pottery as
Have
well.
a look what Henrietta's
Yes.
got here.
We've got this large chunk of Quebec Pottery which came from well down towards the bottom of the ditch where they're working now, and the whole thing has got very soft and soggy.
Right.
It's very, very fragile. But even so, it's sufficiently of the type that I think one could be fairly certain that it's Iron Age.
It came from about a centimetre off the bottom,
Ah,
and you know what the implications for that are?
Yeah, so that's right there at the beginning of
That's
the
right.
phase of the site, yeah.
One piece of pottery, but such an important find, because it tells us that the ditch and rampart around this huge site were created by people in the Iron Age. But why did they need such a big centre at Gear? Stuart's convinced this huge enclosure was a meeting and trading place designed to be seen for miles around.
The gear enclosure tilts down. It's actually on a slope, facing this direction quite deliberately so it can be seen.
For once, the experts almost agree with each other.
What we're actually seeing is a centre which might have served the community for a wide distance around as a centre, perhaps in the summer, for exchange, ritual and general get-togethers.
So you're thinking of this almost like a sort of equivalent of a small town, perhaps, a small market town?
Something like that, yes.
I think I agree with Henrietta that it's a settlement, it's not a hill fort. But I do think what we're looking at here is the service industry, which is servicing all the agriculture all over the place.
We're almost out of time, but we've now unearthed a second roundhouse and established that the Iron Age occupation stretches across this enclosure. This roundhouse is better preserved and full of some of the highest status pottery we've seen at Gear. Most importantly, we've found evidence to establish that both Gear and Caervallic were in use at the same time. Do our experts have an opinion of what Caervallic was used for?
Could we play a game and say that this is for the people? Caervallic could well be that small round, could well be the impressive centre for the big man of the area, the Mr. Big.
Well, you could play that game, or you could say that the Caervallic was more for an elite of whatever kind within society.
You wanted to know something about these two sites.
Well, something would be nice. We know so much more than we did, 3 days ago, was it? It seems like a lifetime, but it was only 3 days ago. But we've only excavated less than 1/10 of 1% of the archaeology.
We're standing slap bang in the middle of an Iron Age roundhouse, and even though we've almost finished, still beautiful finds are coming up, like this lovely piece of amphora, high status pottery for pouring wine. It's been a great 3 days, but the final piece of the jigsaw is the geophysics of the whole place. John, have you finished it yet?
You're still healthy?
30 seconds ago.
God, look at
There you
that,
are,
the whole
complete
lot.
picture.
Ian, have a look at that.
I mean, that's absolutely amazing. We've never had anything like this before in Cornwall, and I mean, the complexity of it's just absolutely fantastic.
There's enough here to keep the experts talking for years. Ignore the relatively modern field boundaries. We've proved that these are Iron Age houses, and it's likely that all these are too. We believe that these ditches are earlier and probably part of a Bronze Age site occupying this area of the field, which was expanded into a much bigger enclosure in the Iron Age. There are other intriguing anomalies, like this one near the entrance, and perhaps even a Neolithic field system hidden away in this fantastic archaeological map, showing occupation here over 4,000 years and made possible by the wonders of geophysics. Fiona, Christina, John, do you know how far you've walked over the last 3 days?
Far too far.
We've calculated it at 62.5 miles. Phil, Rex! We know we spend most of the time slagging you off, and quite right so.
Absolutely, yeah.
Nevertheless, here you are. This is for you, for all the work that you've done.
Great.
Let's go, Buffy!